All right, this is going to be a quick tutorial on how to use keyframing in geopix. So there's a couple different ways. There is a global keyframing and there's also one that's local to macros, but we're going to test them both in the context of macros just because it's easiest to see and understand. So we click play, we have our time. It's worth noting macro time is a local time slider that loops or does whatever your macro settings indicate, which is set up here. But you also have a global time slider, which is how you might orchestrate, a whole playthrough for a song or a set, and you just want to hit play on the whole thing and let it run through. So we'll talk about both of these. First, we'll talk about the local macro time and why you should use this if possible. So by default, the ramp will just push with the time, right? So if you have a 10-second macro, it takes 10 seconds for the phase of the ramp. And if you have a 1-second macro, it takes 1 second, so on and so forth. You can decouple the ramp's timing from the macro's timing by turning off timing in the ramp itself. And any generator that is time-based will have that option. So that means noise and other things like that. So you'll see now that we have done that, our ramp is at phase 0, our sliders do nothing, and we have manual control over the phase if we just want to pick a value for some reason. So let's go ahead and hook this up to what we call um, a keyframer generator, and this is essentially going to have a keyframe node. Now if you connect this, the default keyframes will play, and you'll notice that this is sort of a sine wave essentially, and it's just oscillating back and forth. So let's edit this keyframer. We can click edit over here and it's going to pop up the animation editor, and it's going to have a single value over here on the left, and that is the keyframe we see here. So let's just click the add button and we'll add a few more key points to this, and we can move them around. And there's also a few other buttons up here. You have set to 1 or set to 0, which is a convenient way of just flattening your curve. If you know you need your keys, at one extreme or the other, you can also use this button here, which will set them to the max. So let's just say you have these 3 selected. You can kind of flatten them all to the top there. You can also do that in reverse, bring them to the lowest point. So very useful stuff there. You can also select your keyframes and change them to linear, for example, if you want a linear keyframe, and you can have some other options here as well. So that's all very handy. Once you've got that set up, your keyframe is going to just do its thing, and it's going to drive that locally. So you can also see that in action if you scrub. All right, so that's one. And this is, the data for the keyframer is flowing through the node connections, which is in geopix designed to be, that's the intended use case, right? You're supposed to use the UI, which may be slow at times, to kind of set up your scene, but once things are built, you're not creating and destroying pathways and nodes and textures and projectors. The actual data that flows through the network can be fast. So this is recommended, but it's not going to work for every situation. There are times when you want to simply keyframe things down here to the global slider, and that's absolutely fine. So do that. Let's delete this keyframe node, and let's go ahead and keyframe this phase parameter globally. So the way we do that is by right-clicking on, move this keyframe that you want to keyframe, and then right-click and click keyframe. And we'll just do that a couple times here. You'll notice that we get a red tick for every keyframe that we add. So now this does nothing. Even if the macro is playing, we get no motion. But if we move the global time slider, it obviously does work. So that's pretty handy. But if we want to edit that further, we can open the animation editor in global mode. That's what you get when you click on it down here, as opposed to in the animation nodes edit animation. And you will get your channels over here that you've keyframed. And it's recommended to just throw a few keyframes on something, even if you're going to make them, modify them here. It's just easier. And And so once you have that, you can just click home, and you can add a few more keyframes here and do whatever you need to do with these keys. All the same rules apply here as well. Okay, so let me just demonstrate kind of the broader picture here. How you might use this is you would create a fixture, and let's just create a quick grid and then a quick projector, and we'll plug this macro into that projector, and we'll hop back over here. So you'll see that because we have our macro assigned, it was playing. I just turned play off. You'll notice that nothing is showing, and that's because even though we are driving the timing of our ramp inside this macro with keyframes, the macro still has to be playing or in a play state to be visible on that projector. So we still need to make sure that we're playing that macro, which will, show the timing moving, but this timing is irrelevant. What's important is that it's playing equals on. So if we've done that and we click play on the master time bar down here, you will see things play, although why we're not seeing it play right now is because I hit the back button, which will reset things back to the beginning. I will show you one last thing that will explain that, but let me just go ahead and click play manually. And so if we move this back here to like frame 9 and hit play, you'll see that we now have a functioning time slider. So the reason why clicking this button here resets things to black is because that's what you would do before triggering a full playthrough on the global time. And really, when you keyframe things globally, it's assuming you're also sequencing these macros as well. So that brings us to the last thing I will touch on here. It's very similar UI. On the horizontal axis, you have your global time units, which you can change in the settings. So we have 600 frames, 600 frames. You can see the yellow bar moving across. And then vertically, we have slots, just numerical slots. You can, arbitrarily stack things. I wouldn't stack too many because that means more concurrency, but you can, you can have two macros playing at the same time if you want. And you just drag them out from here. You can resize them. You can have fade zones, so you can fade in and out. But this gives you the ability to see if we can get all of this visible on the screen at once. You'll see that we have a red line, different kind of keyframe. It essentially lets you architect a whole show run through kind of situation. And so you can have different macros blending around between each other. In fact, let's just go ahead and show that for completeness here. We'll duplicate that macro. It will lose the keyframe connections, and that's okay. We'll just go ahead and turn on the normal timing, get us some random colors, and we'll hop back to the sequence editor, and let's go ahead and refresh this. Let's just click play and stop. So now we've got the correct thumbnail, and we can drag this in here, stretch it out, give ourselves some blending. Yeah, and so now let's go ahead and click play, and let's hop over here to the editor and watch it. And then we faded to the other macro, and then it's going to fade down. So that's it. That's how you keyframe things. Again, I just want to reiterate, if you are keyframing things out here, it's kind of the Wild West. You can keyframe literally any of these things, but it's not necessarily recommended. There might be times when if you have an LED panel or an LED wall that is on a motorized winch and it goes up and down, this would be a really expensive show production. But if you happen to be in a situation like this, where something needs to move in the 3D editor to match that, you can, right? So let's just go ahead and keyframe this projector to move from here. We'll keyframe this, and then at the end, we'll have it move up to here. You can totally do this. Now, this type of motion, it's not how geopix was designed. So you'll notice down here in the FPS counter, this little green bar graph in the back, you'll see the performance hit goes up a little bit when you do stuff like this. Now, what we're doing now is not that bad, totally doable, but you just have to keep an eye on your performance when you start to animate arbitrary parameters because some of these will incur a heavy cost and others may not. So it's something you just have to test and play around with and see. This is why having a fast CPU is important if you're going to do stuff like this because it will help keep these things snappy and fast. Whereas the graphics card is more what you need when you're really just running that kind of normal geopix flow. So, all right, that's it for this tutorial. Thanks for watching.